Hello everyone, welcome back to Isaiah from Mormons. We're going to be going into chapter 8 today. Um, as always, we have to talk about sort of the layout of the chapter. I don't think there really should be any division between chapter 7 and chapter 8. He's talking about similar themes, and obviously it's arranged thematically, but I think we can really say this is probably part of the same sermon that he's giving in chapter 7. It's a continuation of it. He alludes actually back to what they're doing in chapter 7 with the water supply. You remember that in chapter 7, everybody's kind of tinkering with the water supply, trying to get ready for the siege. The king of Judah has made this deal with the Assyrians to try to make sure that he's safe. And Isaiah is trying to sort of talk him out of it. And Isaiah is telling him exactly what's going to happen if he goes through with this deal in chapter 7 and chapter 8. And he alludes back to them tinkering with the water supply. So this whole thing actually is probably supposed to be one big sermon, Isaiah trying to sort of talk these guys out of it. It goes from 7 through at least all the way through chapter 8. And in fact, chapter 8 stops really in the middle of a sentence. Yeah, that's one thing that's difficult with Hebrew is that Old Hebrew does not have punctuation. It doesn't really, well, it doesn't have vowels either, but it doesn't have punctuation, and so you don't really know when sections are supposed to end. That's kind of a judgment call. I personally think the Dead Sea Scrolls do a pretty good job at dividing up the sections, but sometimes I don't think they do. Most of the time I think they do a good job. But this is one case where I think, no, really this is almost the middle of the sentence that it cuts off at the end of the chapter and then begins chapter 9. So you kind of have to take it into context and realize that really for a while this is going to be one long thing. So you have to remember, you have to have continuity between what we did before and what we're doing this time and what we're going to do next time, so that you can realize there's kind of an arc here that he's talking about. That's one thing I'm not going to really be able to get as well in this series is sort of larger arcs. So I mean, when you go back, you should look for larger themes in Isaiah, because that's definitely something that's very useful. So anyway, let's just dive in here to chapter 8 and try to make sense of what's going on and tie it back a little bit to chapter 7. So we start off here with something that we've talked about before, the idea that we're not really sure whether or not Isaiah is physically writing stuff down all the time. And in fact, probably he isn't. Probably he's giving these lectures, these sermons, really, and then other people are writing them down later. And this is the verse where we get some evidence for that. So this is the beginning of Isaiah 8, and this is about verses 1 through 4. It says, "Moreover, the word of the Lord said unto me, Take thee a great roll, and write in it with a man's pen concerning Maher-shalal-hash-baz. And I took unto me faithful witnesses to record, Uriah the priest, and Zechariah the son of Jeberechiah. And I went unto the prophetess, and she conceived, and bare a son. Then said the Lord to me, Call his name Maher-shalal-hash-baz. For behold, the child shall not have knowledge to cry, My father and my mother, before the riches of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria shall be taken away before the king of Assyria." So here we have this idea that Isaiah is speaking and that it's being recorded in the heavenly tablets, but Isaiah needs to actually physically write it down. And that's what this phrase means. "Moreover, the word of the Lord said unto me, Take thee a great roll." This is probably not a roll. You would think this would be something like a scroll. This is probably a roll as in they used to take clay and they would roll it out and scrape it off. I think that's probably what we're looking at here. It's scrape it smooth and then write in it with a stylus. That word pen is like one of these styluses. So this is, take this this clay tablet that you've made smooth, write on it with a stylus about Maher-shalal-hash-baz. But that word man's pen, that really is mortal. Okay, so the word of the Lord said unto me, Take thee a clay tablet, write in it with a mortal's pen. Usually what you say is recorded on the heavenly tablets. The heavenly tablets aren't good enough this time. You need to physically write it down, okay, with a mortal pen. And it is about Maher-shalal-hash-baz. Or this could also be, I write it with a man's pen to hasten the prey. He hurries to the spoil, something like that. It's a parallelism. Actually, is the name of his son. In 2 verses we get to that. But I think that this is like a witness against the people. He writes, "To hurry to the spoil, he hastens the prey, something like that. It's kind of a strange phrase, but yeah, it's explained in verse 4 that this is talking specifically about what the Assyrians are going to do. They're hurrying up um, so they can get to the spoil of these cities that they're conquering. Okay, that's the idea here. So in verse 2 it says, so he writes this down, and he takes faithful witnesses to record. So this may even be scribes. He's getting people to write it down for him. Uriah the priest and Zechariah the son of Jeberechiah is getting people to write these down for him. So he's told to do this, get somebody to do it for him. So maybe this is an indication that he isn't actually literate, right? He needs somebody else to write it down for him. It says witnesses here, but the implication I get is no, he may actually need someone to write it down for him. So once again, Isaiah may be the sort of great poet, bard sort of guy, but he may not be extra good at writing. It's just a thought there. Verse 3 says, "Well, I went into the prophetess." That's kind of an interesting phrase. Some people, I think, have read too much into that. I think that's just his wife. The female version of prophet, went unto his wife. Although, at this time, these guys, obviously, if you're doing something like this, your wife is totally in on it with you. She's really supporting you. Has to be supporting you every step of the way, or else it's not going to work out for you, right? So, I think that prophetess is an interesting and fitting title here. I don't think that's a discussion of authority, really. I think it's a discussion of her relationship to her husband. She is there to support her husband. We sometimes look at prophets differently in the modern world. In Isaiah's time, he's a prophet, but by that really it means that God's speaking to him to talk to the people, and he's speaking out against problems that are happening. It doesn't actually necessarily mean that he maybe even has more authority than other people, although he might. It's impossible to say. But you have people who you seem to come out of nowhere who act as prophets. I mean, there's a random bard in 2 Kings who prophesies, right? So we should be careful when we read prophet. We shouldn't try to superimpose president of the church over that. And in fact, Brigham Young, even in this dispensation, says, there are lots of people who are prophetic, but that has nothing to do with them being the president of the church. They're just prophetic, right? He says when he really wants prophecy, he goes to Heber C. Kimball, if I remember that quote correctly from Brigham Young. So it doesn't really have anything to do with being president of the church. Some people just have the gift. Isaiah has the gift. Isaiah definitely may have had some authority. It's very difficult to say. But we have to remember that this system is a little bit different than our system. Anyway, so he goes into the prophetess, his wife. She conceives and bears a son, and God says, call his name Maher-shalal-hash-baz. To hasten the prey, he hurries to the spoil. It could just be a parallelism. He hastens to the prey, he hurries to the spoil, something like that. But then that all gets explained in verse 4. For behold, the child, this kid, Maher-shalal-hash-baz, shall not have knowledge to cry, my father and my mother, mommy or daddy, right? Before the riches of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria, okay? It's the same word here, spoil, right? The plunder. Okay, before the riches of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria shall be taken away before the king of Assyria. So he says, yeah, the spoil, the king of Assyria is hurrying up to get to the spoil. In fact, he's hurrying so quickly that this kid isn't even going to be able to say mama and dada before the Assyrians have come in, wiped out Damascus, wiped out Samaria, and taken all that plunder, right? So I think that's what we're looking at with this early section. But like I said, it should be noted, Isaiah, he may not be writing any of this down. And like I said, there's a lot of indications that this is meant to be spoken, that Isaiah spoke this, and that other people wrote it down. So I think that's important to note here as we go through this. And then we get some notion that we're really supposed to be tying this back to chapter 7. Verse 5 it says, the Lord also spake unto me again, saying, forasmuch as this people refuseth the waters of Shiloah that go softly, and rejoice in reason and Remaliah's son, now therefore, behold, the Lord bringeth up upon them the waters of the river strong and many, even the king of Assyria and all his glory. And he shall come up over all his channels and go over all his banks. And he shall pass through Judah. He shall overflow and go over. He shall reach even to the neck. And the stretching out of his wings shall fill the breadth of thy land, O Emmanuel. So here in verse 5, the Lord is talking to him again, and seems to be alluding back to the water project in verse 7, in chapter 7. It says, "Forasmuch as this people refuseth the waters of Shiloah that go softly." Now, Jerusalem is a fantastic location because it's easily defensible, but it has a good water supply. And one of the major water courses in Jerusalem is called that, Shiloah. It has various name changes, subtle name changes over time, but Shiloah is the name of the water course in Jerusalem that keeps Jerusalem alive and makes it such an excellent place to live. Because, like I said, easily defensible, good water source in the Middle East. That's what you need. And so what he's saying is, these guys, the king has decided to do his own water supply, to do things his own way, to fix it up and make it the way he wants it, instead of just trusting in God. You can't see that as well in 6, but let me explain it. So it says, "Forasmuch as the people refuseth the waters of Shiloah that go softly," and that word, when you look at it carefully, should probably be secretly. So this water course, like I said, around Jerusalem, it's called Shiloah, and it seemed to flow underground through a series of cracks in the ground until it came out at a good spot. Nobody really knew for a long time where it was coming from. In Isaiah's lifetime, they'll figure out how this works, and they'll exploit this to make their own water course. And Isaiah will make fun of them for it when they do. But it was a kind of mysterious. The water just flowed through these cracks in the ground from one place to the other and just came out in this place. And for the king at the time, he said, "No, that's not good enough. We need to figure out the water supply." So Isaiah makes this analogy. Just like you guys are trying to figure out the water supply and do it your own way rather than relying on the waters that flow secretly, where you don't know how it's going to be, you just know that it works. And you want to rejoice. It says rejoice in Reason and Remaliah's son. It should be rejoice over Reason and Remaliah's son, like rejoice in the victory over him because of your alliance with the Assyrians. You remember that? Okay, you want to make this alliance with Syria and rejoice over Reason and Remaliah's son. That's going to be a problem for you. Okay, you should, and just like with the water, you should just be happy that God provides the waters for you in ways that you don't understand. So you also should have just been happy to have God take care of you in ways that you didn't necessarily understand, instead of being buddy with the Assyrians and rejoicing over your puny little enemies when you really should be worried about the Assyrians. So, you've traded your security for a temporary kick in being able to rejoice over Reason and Remaliah's son. But now that you've made this alliance, you're a creek without a paddle, to go along with the water analogy. "Now therefore, behold, the Lord bringeth up upon them the waters of the river, strong and many." So you weren't happy with the secret water course that you didn't understand, the Shiloah water course. Well, now you're going to get an inundation, and it's going to be called the king of Assyria, right? "Now therefore, behold, the Lord bringeth up upon them the waters of the river, strong and many, even the king of Assyria and all his glory. He shall come over all his channels and go over all his banks." Just like the river that, and in fact the waters of the river, this is probably an allusion to the Euphrates. The Euphrates is notorious for being unpredictable. The Nile, you can practically set your watch to the Nile. It always floods perfectly the way it's supposed to. Every single time, it always does it right around the same time of year, basically, or at least it's predictable. The Euphrates is totally unpredictable, and it sometimes just wipes out whole cities. So he says, you didn't like the God option of God saving you in ways that you didn't understand, so you looked for something that you could understand, the king of Assyria, to help you. But now you're going to get washed away by the king of Assyria, right? To stay with the water analogy. He's going to He's going to overflow you, just like the Euphrates overflows unpredictably every year and wipes people out. This is not going to go well for you. It says, and he shall go over all his channels and go over all his banks. Is probably but these people tried to channel the water away into predictable irrigation canal kind of things, but a lot of times they would get ruined when the Euphrates would overflow. So that's the image he's painting here. And he shall pass through Judah, and it's really like push into Judah, flood into Judah. He shall overflow and go over, cover everything. Shall reach even unto the neck. Right? Almost the idea of somebody drowning and their head's just barely above water. And the stretching out of his wings, and that really should be probably this covering of water. Stretching out of the covering of water shall fill the breadth of thy land. O Emmanuel. Do you remember back earlier in chapter 7? Talked about this kid, right? Who this kid was going to be a little kid when he saw that everything was taken out by the Assyrians. In chapter 7, does the same thing at the beginning of this chapter, but back in chapter 7, he talked about Emmanuel, right? And he makes reference again to that kid here. Emmanuel is going to be experiencing this. But once again, there's a classic pun. This flood that's going to come to the neck. Well, what does that mean? The Assyrians, when they come in, they take out almost everything. Except for Judah, except for Jerusalem. They take out all of Judah except for Jerusalem, which is almost like this head that's just barely above water, right? That's the image that he's painting here. And it never gets taken out by the Assyrians. It survives. And so that's what he's talking about here. But he says, that's the pun, oh, Emmanuel. He's just talking about Emmanuel from chapter 7. But I think there's a pun here that why is he not going to completely take out? Why isn't it going to go flow over the head, right? Because Emmanuel, because God is with us, right? So God being with them is going to keep them from being completely wiped out by the Assyrians, which is almost what happens. So then Isaiah proceeds to specifically condemn them more for this alliance. He says, associate yourselves, O ye people, and ye shall be broken in pieces. Give ear, all ye far countries. Gird yourselves, and ye shall be broken in pieces. Gird yourselves, and ye shall be broken in pieces. Take counsel together, and it shall come to naught. Speak the word, and it shall not stand. For God is with us. Once again, same phrase, Emmanuel. For the Lord spake thus to me with a strong hand, and instructed me that I should not walk in the way of this people, saying, say ye not a confederacy, to all whom this people shall say a confederacy, neither fear ye their fear, nor be afraid. So he says, listen, you guys want to make alliances? You guys make alliances, you're going to get destroyed. It doesn't matter how far away the country is you're trying to make an alliance with. In the act of girding yourselves, in the act of putting on your sword belt for war, you're going to get broken in pieces. Interesting that he says that you shall be broken in pieces 3 times in this verse. Can't help but wonder if that's a little bit of a guarantee. Isaiah invoking sort of the law of witnesses by himself, right? Saying it over and over again in the same verses are a little reminder. There's no way this is going to happen, and I personally guarantee that this is not going to happen. Take counsel together. Once again, make an alliance. Try to figure this out together. It's not going to work. Speak the word, and it shall not stand. For God is with us. Once again, a reference to Emmanuel. And I think that's why he says, people of far countries, yeah, if you guys try to make alliances with others, that's not going to work either. But if you repent and other people try to make alliances against you, it's not going to work either. Why? Because God is with us. In verse 11 it says, for the Lord spake thus unto me with a strong hand, and instructed me. So speaking with a strong hand seems like it means very, very strongly God means this, okay? And instructed me that I should not walk in the way of this people. So all these people are trying to do it the mortal way, which is make alliances, right? That's what you always do. You want to fend off a bigger power? You make alliances. Other guys want to attack you, they make alliances. And Isaiah says, no. Don't do any of this. God is supposed to protect you. Okay, let Him protect you. So this is what God is saying to him, apparently very forcefully. It says, "Say ye not a confederacy, to all to whom this people shall say a confederacy, neither fear ye their fear, nor be afraid." Don't say, "Oh, let's make an alliance," to all these people who are saying to other people, "Oh yeah, let's make an alliance." No, don't do that. Don't fear the fears they fear, and don't be afraid is a slightly different word. Don't dread what they dread. Don't have worldly fears and anxieties. And he explains that a little bit more as he goes on here. So here he explains, okay, you shouldn't be afraid of these other guys. If you don't repent, you should be afraid of God. To sanctify the Lord of hosts himself, let him be your fear, and let him be your dread. And he shall be for a sanctuary, but for a stone of stumbling, and for a rock of offense to both the houses of Israel, for a gin and a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And many among them shall stumble and fall, and be broken, and be snared, and be taken. Bind up the testimony, seal the law among my disciples, and I will wait upon the Lord, that hideth his face from the house of Jacob, and I will look for him. So here he says, in verse 12 he said, don't be afraid of their fears, and don't dread their dreads. And here it says, make the Lord of hosts holy to you. God should be holy to you. He should be different. That's one meaning for holy. And I think that may be what he's talking about here is God should be different. You shouldn't just have God be one of your many considerations. God should be special to you. Make the Lord of hosts holy to you. Make him special to you. And let him be your fear, and let him be your dread. Don't be afraid of the fears that others are afraid of. Let him be your fear. Let him be your dread. Now, that doesn't mean like we're afraid of him, he's going to wipe us out. I think this is an idea of awe and respect that we have for God. And yeah, if you don't repent, you probably should be afraid of him. But I think this is more reverence, is what we're looking at here. And he shall be for a sanctuary. So if you allow him, he will be a sanctuary, a holy place. That's the same word there. Sanctify, make holy the Lord of hosts himself, and he shall be like a sanctuary. You have to understand the position of the Jerusalem temple. The Jerusalem temple is on this, Solomon's temple is on this rocky outcropping, and it's the highest place around. It's on a mountain that used to be sort of in front of the entrance of Jerusalem, but then they sort of annexed it and put the temple there. So it's an absolutely fantastic place to hold out in a siege. And in fact, when the Babylonians came, that was probably the last place they held out. We know that was the last place they held out. When the Romans besieged the place, it's a fantastic refuge. So it's a temple, but it's also a refuge, which I think is kind of a fantastic image, that the temple is a refuge, because I think it's supposed to be. Literally here, it's a physical refuge from siege, but I think spiritually the temple should be a refuge for us as well. And it says, he shall be for a sanctuary, a temple, a holy place, but also I think a defensive position when you look at the rest of the verse. But for a stone of stumbling and for a rock of offense to both the houses of Israel, for a gin and a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. God is supposed to be a sanctuary, and if you make him holy, if you sanctify him, he will be like a sanctuary. But if you don't, he will be a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense. So that's a rock of offense. There seems to be something that you would put in the way to make somebody trip over it, very similar to a stone of stumbling, a stumbling block. But I think the idea is something you would set up to slow people down in a military position. I think that's the case here, so that it's easier to pick people off with archers from the walls. Okay, I think that's what we're looking at here. Stone of offense to both the houses of Jerusalem, for a gin and a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. A gin and a snare; those are both words for traps used to trap animals, different kinds of traps apparently. So it says, if you don't make God special for you, if you don't respect Him, it's not going to go well for you. If you respect Him, it's going to be great. If you don't, things are going to go very badly, and you're going to be caught just like these animals. That's what he says. Just like animals. That's what he says in verse 15. And many among them shall stumble and fall, just like stumbling over the rocks in verse 14, and be broken and be snared and be taken, which you would be taken in a trap, like in the other half of the verse. Okay. So he says the only way to avoid this is to bind up the testimony and seal the law among my disciples. Binding up the testimony, I think, is this idea that they're supposed to tie themselves to it. Instead of being tied up in this trap that is being set, that they're sort of setting for themselves, if you must be tied to something, be tied to the testimony, be tied to the law. And I think these are both references to the law of Moses. And it says, among my disciples, that's those that know, those that have learned. And we'll get back to this phrase in a minute, because it's kind of interesting. And it says, and I will wait upon the Lord that hideth his face from the house of Jacob, and I will look for him. So instead of doing all these other things, if you must be bound to something, be bound to the law of Moses. And wait upon the Lord. This isn't necessarily serving the Lord. Somebody waits upon somebody else. This is actually waiting for the Lord. Because right now, it looks like he's sort of hiding his face. But we need to look for him, even when he seems like he's hiding his face. There are times when God can't maybe help us quite as much as he would prefer. And we have to wait for those times to pass for God to help us again. Sometimes bad things just need to happen. But he says, no, I'm going to wait for God's timing. And that's a very difficult thing to do, but Isaiah says this is the only way. We have to wait for him, even though right now it seems like he's hiding his face for us. We'll look for him, and eventually we'll find him. And you can imagine how terrible this time that he's describing is going to be for them, because he knows they're not going to repent until the last moment, right? Things are going to be really terrible, and it looks like God's going to be hiding for them. Well, Isaiah's saying, no, God's not. Yeah, God's hiding right now. But I'm waiting for him. He's not going to hide forever. And then he goes on to say sort of how he knows this, and that's this verse 18. He says, behold, I and the children whom the Lord hath given me are for signs and for wonders in Israel from the Lord of hosts which dwelleth in Mount Zion. And when they shall say unto you, seek unto them that have familiar spirits, and unto wizards that peep and mutter, shall not a people seek unto their God for the living to hear from the dead? To the law and to the testimony? And if they speak not according to this word, it is because there is no light in them. And they shall pass through it hardly bestead and hungry. And it shall come to pass that when they shall be hungry, they shall fret themselves, and curse their king and their God, and look upward. And they shall look into the earth, and behold trouble, and darkness, dimness of anguish, and shall be driven to darkness. So here it says, before he talks about some of the things going on, and how does he necessarily know that God is coming for him? How does he know that he should wait for God? Well, 18 says, behold, I and the children whom the Lord hath given me are for signs and wonders, or maybe signs and omens, perhaps, in Israel from the Lord of hosts, which dwelleth in Mount Zion. So he says, I know that God is going to help me, and I'm going to wait for him, because God has told me how to name my children, and the names of his children very clearly show what God is going to do. We've seen them crop up periodically as showing what God is going to do. He says, this is the sign that I know that God is going to come through for us, and that I should wait for him. And he's the Lord of hosts, which dwelleth in Mount Zion. And that's I was just talking about that before. That's the temple. Once again, he's tying it back to the temple. He's getting this sign from the Lord of hosts, which dwells in Mount Zion. Now, some people are not getting their signs from God, who at the temple. They're getting their signs from other sources, and that's what we see in 19. And when they shall say unto you, seek unto them that have familiar spirits, and unto wizards that peep and mutter. So familiar spirits. Isaiah will bring this up periodically throughout the book. These, what people used to do apparently is they used to dig big holes in the ground. They would sort of call into the hole people, these sort of wizards or whatever, like it says there, necromancers. They would try to communicate with the dead by digging this hole in the ground and calling into the hole in the ground and getting responses from people. People in Sheol or hell, or as we would call it. Obviously, this is probably one big fake, right? But that's the idea. That was the belief at the time, is that people could do this. He says, and these people would, it says, peep and mutter, and I guess that they would make like very strange noises while they were doing this. And once again, maybe this is all fake, or maybe we're getting into some really weird stuff here. Anyway, I won't go into that too much, but this is some weird stuff that people are doing. They're digging this hole in the ground, pretending like they can communicate with spirits, and they're making these weird noises and stuff. And Isaiah's like, really? Shouldn't you, if you want to hear from the dead, shouldn't you seek to God? You can read the words of the dead in the law and in the testimony, like he says in verse 20. Going back to the law of Moses, read the words of the dead in these books. And if you're not, if they are not saying, reinforcing the law of Moses, then why are you even dealing with these necromancers, right? You should be dealing with the law of Moses. That's the voices of, those dead are the voices you should be hearing from, the voices of the prophets that have gone before, not this necromancy stuff. And he says, if they speak not according to this word, talking about the temple and reinforcing goodness, it is because there is no light in them. It's all just one big joke. This idea of darkness, there's no light in them. He'll continue here. It's like I said, it's a hole in the ground, right? And there's this temple that's up on the hill. It gets all kinds of light. Well, these guys, these necromancers do it, and they're dig these holes in the dark, and there's no light in them, right? And 21 it elaborates, and it says, and they shall pass through it, hardly bestead and hungry. Presumably come through it. He's talking about the siege now. When the Assyrians come in and almost wipe out Jerusalem, they will pass through it hardly bestead and hungry. We might say angry and hungry. And it shall come to pass, when they shall be hungry, they shall fret themselves. And here, fret themselves is kind of like hate themselves, almost curse themselves. They shall hate themselves and curse their king and their God. And then it says, and look upward, or that could also be, because of the ambiguity of the language, it could be, and look upon their sins or upon their troubles. So, they'll be in the siege, and they're going to be trying to turn to these wizards to get help. And they'll make it through it, but it'll be a terrible situation for them. They'll be really hungry, and then they will realize, they'll fret themselves, they'll curse themselves, they'll curse their own mistakes. And they'll curse their king and their God. It says God there, that should be gods. That's one painfully ambiguous thing about the Old Testament. You never know if they're talking about God or pagan gods, right? But here I think it says, they'll curse their king, who made this stupid alliance, and their gods, the other gods that they have worshipped, and look upon their sins. So when this siege, then they'll realize, they'll curse their king who was stupid, they'll curse their gods, other gods who they worshipped, and they'll look upon their sins. And they shall look into the earth, going back to the necromancy thing, digging that hole that they dig, they'll look into the earth, and behold trouble and darkness, dimness of anguish, sort of this, that's kind of a terrifying image actually, but dark anguish, and shall be driven into the darkness. Very kind of terrifying image. almost like the next time they try to dig this hole to consult the spirits in the underworld, almost like they're going to drag them down into the darkness with them. Kind of a terrifying image. Anyway, won't go into that much, but definitely he's playing with the idea of necromancy in these verses. He's saying, listen, you don't need necromancy. Why are you doing this? You need to consult God. You need to read the law of Moses. You want to look at the words of what the dead are saying? Go read the law of Moses. And in fact, he'll come back to this image later. We'll talk about that in connection with the Book of Mormon. But Isaiah, this whole chapter really comes back to one theme, and that is, why are you guys trying to do things the world's way? God's way is so much better. You try to find all these alternatives to help yourself, to take care of yourself, to figure things out. Don't do that. Turn to God. God's the one that's going to help you, not these other people, not these necromancers, not these alliances with the Assyrians. You needed to turn to God. God's the one that would have helped you, and He's still willing to help you if you'll come back to Him. And I really think that that's one of the key messages of Isaiah. Don't try all these other things. Get God's help. He's the one that will actually help you. And I think that's one reason why this is so relevant. So we all have problems. We're not necessarily in a situation where we're about to be besieged, but we all have problems. And we sometimes turn to all these sources to solve our problems when God is just sitting there waiting for us to ask Him. He's saying, listen, why are you doing this? Turn to me. I'll help you. I'll help you take care of your problems. You don't need this other stuff. I'll take care of you. And I think that's what Isaiah is trying to tell us. So anyway, that's it for today. Like I said, this chapter, it really cuts off in the middle of a sentence. So we'll get to the rest of that later, and I'll explain that more next time. But glad to be able to run through this with you today, and we'll see you guys next time.